Okay, so welcome. My name is Benjamin. Welcome to this online event in collaboration with Project 1957 and the Nana Project. I'll give you a little brief about Project 1957 for those who don't know. I'm one quarter of Project 1957. We are an initiative designed to help cultivate Ghanaian culture in the diaspora, because we're based in the UK. And we do loads of events like this, just giving people the opportunity to access our culture, to discuss different elements of our beautiful culture. And so we're really excited for today's event. I will be shortly passing you on to Kirstie from Nana Project, who will tell you a bit more about what she does at the Nana Project. Just a few house rules. I am assuming that everyone is on mute by default. So if there will be a chance for you to speak in terms of asking questions, giving feedback. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, whether it's your phone or it's your laptop. You'll be able to ask. I think you can actually start asking questions now. We will be able to see that. No one else will be able to see your questions, so don't worry. We will be able to see that on the panel, and you can ask any of these beautiful women on your screen questions regarding what they do in their specific line of work. There should be a raise hand function at the bottom as well, and you can use that to signal to us that you'd like to speak. Just make sure that you only do that at the allocated time. So yeah, just be open, be respectful in your views. Obviously, we have a wide range of people from different backgrounds and different views, so let's just all be respectful to that. So what I'm going to do, without further ado, is pass you on to our host, who is Kirstie, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone. My name's Kirstie Kwarteng, and I am the founder of the Nana Project. And the Nana Project is an online platform that's dedicated to preserving firsthand accounts of Ghana's history. And we do this by recording video stories and audio stories of Ghanaian elders, because the Ghana that they grew up in really only exists in their mind. We feel like it's important to preserve the memories that they have before they're all gone. And I will be the moderator and the host for this event today. And we are all here to celebrate Ghana's Republic Day. And for those of you who may not know what Republic Day is, I'll explain it to you. So Ghana got its independence in 1957. But from 1957 to 1960, June 30th, 1960, Ghana was not a republic. Ghana was not totally in charge of all of its affairs. The British still were in control of some things. Queen Elizabeth was actually the official head of state during this time. So because of that, Kwame Nkrumah was not the president, he was the prime minister. But on July 1st, 1960, so literally 60 years ago on this very day, Ghana became an fully independent republic. Queen Elizabeth and the British were officially gone, and that meant Kwame Nkrumah could become the president after being prime minister, and that Ghana was fully in charge of all of its affairs. So to celebrate Republic Day, we are having a conversation about how we can preserve Ghana's rich history and culture digitally. And we felt that this was a very important conversation to have. One, because of COVID, we're all online all the time anyway, and our world has become even more digital and digital based than it was even before COVID. So we felt that it was important for us to really talk about how we can carry out the work of preserving our history in the modern era. And of course, in this modern era, everything is online. So to help us have this discussion, We have 4 really amazing panelists that are doing a lot of really great work in the area of digital history and historical preservation. So I will briefly introduce them, and then I will give them each a few minutes to share a bit more about themselves and their platforms. So we have Kuukuwa Manful, who is the curator of Accra Archive and Adansisem. Rita Benissan, the founder of Si.Hene. Paulina Nkansah, curator of An Ode to Highlife. And Sylvia Arthur, founder of the Library of Africa and the African Diaspora. So Kuukuwa, we can start with you, if you don't mind just sharing a little bit about yourself and the platforms that you curate.
Thank you, Kirstie, and thank you, Nana Project and Project 1957 for having me on here. So as Kirstie said, my name is Kuukuwa Manful. Currently, I'm a PhD student at SOAS University of London. Prior to that, I trained as an architect at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi in Ghana. I'm wild about and passionate about architecture, but also the politics and what it can tell us about social politics, economics, and other related things. And this is where my projects really come from. First, Adansisem, which is about documenting architecture of Ghana. I often don't say Ghanaian architecture because I think that means something different than the architecture of Ghana. And that comes in response to sort of political positioning of architecture in Africa as not actually architecture. And there's a gap in a lot of the history of architecture and practice of architecture in Africa, where they talk about the pyramids and Great Zimbabwe and nothing, and then 1960. So that's where Adansisem comes from. And it's saying that with building and creating space is architecture, and we will document that. So Accra Archive is related to that in that it's looking at archival architectural artifacts and records. So it's all about my madness and wildness about architecture and how best to document it for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Rita?
Hello, everyone. My name is Rita Benissan. Right now, I'm currently in Wisconsin-Madison. I'm a 3rd year, coming to my last year of grad school. And my research within the fine arts is looking into the chieftaincy of Ghana. So thinking about different royal regalias that are used and looking into the photography of how we were documented within the late 1800s, early 1900s. So producing or really being able to have a platform as Si.Hene provides a way to really, see and digitize the archives that are not seen. So even within my research, a lot of these archives are not accessible to everybody. So usually you might have to have like a university, number or email just to connect to one of the databases that are affiliated with the museums or even just the missionary archives as well. So as Instagram, especially within this pandemic, I thought, this is a great way to motivate me to continue my research, but also motivate me to, look more deeper into the archives that are not seen and how can we provide it to be more accessible to the people on the country and also just globally as well.
Thank you, Rita. Paulina?
Hi, everybody. My name is Paulina Nkansah. So I'm a HR professional, an artist, and the curator of An Ode to Highlife. So An Ode to Highlife is currently a digital museum dedicated to the retelling of our rich history, specifically Highlife music and its impact and the legacy it's had for music in West Africa, in Ghana, and currently in probably in the whole of the world, really. So the passion for me in terms of Highlife and it being on a digital platform is quite important to me because it was really hard for me as somebody who's an avid lover of Highlife music, and it's quite a niche genre of history, was to have it available and accessible to everybody. And in my research, I actually found it hard to find it in one place. So yeah, like many people have said, this time has kind of provided a great time for me to show what I'm interested in, and engage in a younger generation on the importance of Highlife to Ghanaian history.
Thank you. Sylvia?
Hi, first of all, thank you for having me. My name is Sylvia. I'm the founder of the Library of Africa and the African Diaspora, which is a library in Accra. It evolved from a library that I started 2 years ago called Libraria when I moved from London to Ghana in 2017. And the purpose of the library is to collect the works of African and African diaspora writers from across generations and from across the diaspora as well. So we have books which are both, I guess, books that you can get today still, but we also have books that are rare and out of print that are very difficult to get hold of. We have books that the oldest one, I think it's from 1901 or so, or maybe 1898, right up until the present day. And the books are by writers from Africa, African America, the Caribbean, Black Europe, from all over. We try to get as many books as we can from across the continent, so that we have, I think we have, yeah, I think we've probably got most books from most African nations, and we have books from quite a lot of the diaspora as well. In terms of the Ghana archive, I've been collecting books by Ghanaian writers that are out of print for the past 2 years now or so. And a lot of these books we will put onto our Instagram page so that people can see what we have, but we're also in the process of digitizing them as well. So that's who we are. Thanks.
Thank you all so much. We'll now move into this panel discussion session. Like Ben said in the beginning, if you do have questions, you can ask them in the Q&A box that should be at the bottom of your screen, but we will also have a question and answer time where all the attendees can ask the panelists questions directly. So the first questions I have for all of you, we have a lot of different themes represented here: chieftaincy, architecture, music, and literature. What initially got you all interested in these areas of Ghanaian history? Anyone can go.
I'll start. So my research within the chieftaincy started when I was researching about the royal umbrellas. So last year I was able to go to Ghana and get a lot of information. And surprisingly, when you actually look up a lot of the information about the royal umbrellas, it's not much. And so I really wanted to find ways, how are the umbrellas used, not just when we see them in procession, in movement, but also how are they used within photography. So thinking about who the individual, the king, the chief, the queen mother, how are they placed under the umbrella, who are standing around them with the umbrellas. And that kind of led into thinking about the other royal regalias that are used and are present within a lot of these archives in the photography of the chieftaincy as well. So that's kind of where, you know, the chieftaincy motivation and aspirations came from like the royal umbrellas. So yes.
I can go next. For me, this latter part of this work, the historical part, comes from my own research, my own work in research, and almost seen, because first things first, like there's not enough documentation and preserved history of our past. But even in that limited documentation, there's this overwhelming focus on elite histories, royal histories, umbrellas and things. So I found myself like looking for histories of like, I just want to know what regular people were doing. Like we hear about the big six, but then we know that they can't just get up and get independence. Like people had to work with them, support them. People had to go to rallies. People had to organize. So who are these people? Who are the people that don't make it? Who are not deemed important enough for history books, even the ones written by Black African people. So it's in this looking for histories of other people that lived and breathed and moved in Ghana and in Africa that led me to looking to some of these sources of ordinary people.
I would say for me, for Highlife, definitely it's down to my own passion for Highlife. So just loving Highlife from like a very young age, like many West Africans, many Ghanaians. But for me, once I started to listen to the music, I was intrigued because there's storytelling, there's wisdom, there's information about our culture, and it fits with different parts of our history. When we look at the timeline, as Kuukuwa said, like the Big Six, Kwame Nkrumah, the independence, and you have guys like E.T. Mensah, what Kwame Nkrumah, did for a few of the musicians by taking them, on tour, exposing them to the market, was amazing for me. But I realized that only a few people, really small people, really like a few people documented our history. And it just stopped at biography and year or Wikipedia, which is not enough. And it's not consistent. So as I started to, read vinyl covers, listen to the credits, read the credits, pick up some books, I'm like, I need to share this knowledge. And yeah, so that's how, if I that's how to share it.
Yeah, for me, I've always been a big reader of books and a big lover of books, actually. And so what made me interested in particular was when I started collecting books by African writers. The big misconception about African literature is that it started in 1958 with the publication of Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. And people seem to think that that's the date that it started, and then it was revived again in 2004 with the publication of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Purple Hibiscus. And obviously, the history of African literature is a lot longer than 1958. And so the more and more I began to research African literature and African writing pre-1958, the more I found and the more I became interested and the more I realized that more people actually should know about this. And I think it's the same with diaspora writers as well, and diaspora literature, in the sense that I'm currently reading a book called Shadow Archives by a guy called Jean-Christophe Cloutier. And it's all about how Black writers in the United States, they didn't really have institutions dedicated to the preservation and the study of African American history. So what a lot of the writers were documenting, they're actually archives in and of themselves, and it should be taken seriously. And I think the same is true for African writers, probably to an even greater extent, in that a lot of our archives exist outside of the continent of Africa. For example, I think Amos Tutuola, the Nigerian writer, his archive is at the University of Texas. I think Chinua Achebe's is at Harvard. These great African writers, none of their archives exist here on the continent. And so that's really what made me start to be interested in collecting not only Ghanaian writers, but African writers and African and diaspora writers.
Thank you all for that. That was really, there's a lot of varied responses to that, but ultimately it seems like there's something almost innate about all of the reasons why you all started these platforms, and I'm guessing you decided to put them online as a way to make them more accessible, or was there another reason why you all decided to share the information you found with other people online?
I mean, I think with Instagram and social media in general, we use it on a daily basis, especially if it's for personal use or for our business use. Like, everyone is on Instagram. if you need to know, what is the hottest trend, Instagram or social media. So I think, even for me, I use Instagram. So I was like, okay, well, even my photos could also be seen on Instagram. And even some of the photos that you see are also from older, photo-based Flickr accounts with all these old images, which people don't use Flickr account anymore, but now it's using in a very modern way, as Instagram is a great way to make it more accessible because the audience is global. So either way, whatever hashtag you use is going to connect to someone somewhere. Even within promotions or, even the person who's sharing it, you don't know who's going to see it. So Instagram brings such an accessible way to provide history, historical facts, just photos in generals and videos. So I feel like social media has just been a very accessible way to provide information, even just personal, but also for like research as well.
Yeah, it's similar for me as well. Wanting to make it accessible. And I guess I was sort of putting myself in the shoes of the me who was in undergrad in Kumasi and trying to write a history of Asante architecture, and just getting to source after source that said you needed a library account from an institution in the West, and just not being able to access things that were about me, about my people, about our history, but was not available anywhere in Ghana to find. So it's like creating this digital repository of information that anyone can access, but especially people from the places where this concerns. So for me, it's also beyond. So social media and digital platforms are very important and key in this. But I'm also looking at ways beyond that. So before this whole COVID stuff in June and July, I had planned as part of my project some outreach in primary schools and secondary schools in Ghana, just trying to reach people who have interest in these things. See researching and documenting history as a viable career path.
I think similar to Kuukuwa and Rita, just the exposure that Instagram gives you or digital platforms give you, and I guess with COVID that pushes that more. But I think another reason for me was so for example, with an ode to Highlife, there would be a point where I would want it to be a physical space. But before I get there, it needs to be known. It can't just pop out of nowhere. And social media, from a content creation point of view, a visual tool, Instagram, as a visual tool is really important. And it's the big thing in our day, currently, in our kind of lifetime. So yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially, Instagram has been absolutely essential for promoting the library outside of Ghana and inside of Ghana as well, and getting people to know about it. The other thing I'd say is that I kind of relate to what Kuukuwa was saying, but from the opposite perspective, in that, when I'm posting online, I'm thinking about the people who are sitting in the UK or in America or wherever. And, they are wanting to have access to information about Africa and Ghana in particular. And it's not that easy to get hold of over there. In fact, it's not easy to get hold of over here either. That's the irony of it. It's actually very difficult to get books by Ghanaian writers in Ghana. But definitely, when we are posting on Instagram, it's enabled us to show that actually, yes, books do exist in Ghana and books do exist in Africa, and actually, they do in really great spaces. And the importance of Instagram to the library, actually, I don't think it can be stated enough. It's been a pleasant surprise, actually.
And Sylvia, you are, I think out of all of us, I think you're the only one that currently has both a digital space as well as a physical space. How do you navigate using both of those spaces? What are the biggest differences in using both of those spaces?
Well, that's a good question. That's a tough one. I mean, with the digital space, obviously we're able to reach a greater audience, and by having a physical space, you really are confined by your vicinity, especially in a city like Accra, where the traffic is not great. And it's very difficult to get from one part of the city to the other unless you have a lot of patience. So I think, having the physical space is fantastic, and I wouldn't be without it, but it does restrict the kind of people who will come to the library and when they will come, etc. Having the digital space enables us, as I said, to reach a wider audience. And it also works as a shop front for the actual physical space. So for example, we've had visitors from the United States, from Haiti, from Europe, who all saw that, you know, we have this library in Accra online when they were in their country of origin, let's say, and then they would email me and say, I'm coming to Ghana and I really want to visit your library. So they definitely, the physical space and the online space, they definitely work together in concert, and they work well together, I think. But it can be quite frustrating having a physical space when, you know, you're trying to access certain people, and because of your location, yeah, you're quite restricted by it.
Another question I have for all of you, as we're talking about the differences in different approaches, have you noticed any difference between how people in Ghana engage with your digital platforms versus people outside of Ghana? Are there any differences in the things that they're interested in knowing, or are things pretty similar?
So that depends on the platform, I've noticed. So with Facebook, I would say the local Ghanaians, or those that are in Ghana, engage more with, let's say, with a note to Highlife than they would on Instagram. And I think that's just down to maybe with Ghana, most of them use Facebook or patronize Facebook more than Instagram. It depends, I guess, on the age range. But at the same time, with Instagram, I do have more locals, and they want to know like specific questions, and you know they're asking me, did you know this and did you know that, and I'm like, great, give me the knowledge, let's add it, you know. So I found that actually for musically, for No to Highlife or for a musical platform, I found that the locals engage more than those that are in the diaspora, but that's from what I'm looking at in terms of my insights. Yeah.
I think for me, Si.Hene definitely.
I'll say overall.
Okay.
Oh, we're doing the Zoom standoff. Okay.
Okay. Rita, you can start.
Okay.
I was just saying.
Oh.
you can go. You can go. It's okay.
All right, Kuukuwa, you can start.
Okay, I'm going to talk again. Okay. I heard this happens all the time. This is my first, but I heard it happens all the time. I was just going to reiterate and agree with Paulina, but say that overall is much of the same thing, but it's just regarding specific kind of posts that have like sort of local historical significance to Accra. I have more people trying to give me more information. Oh, did you know this also happened here and this happened there? But overall, it's much of the same, but more sort of questions and asking for directions to further sources from people from the diaspora. Whereas like I have more people saying, oh, my grandma said this and my father told me this.
Yeah. So for me, I get a lot of interactions locally, and I think it's the same thing. It's because they want you to know, okay, oh, who is this chief? Especially since a lot of the photos might not have all the information of the individuals in the chief, which is a little bit irritating a little bit, but it's a whole part of the process. But sometimes, you know, a lot of the followers do help me, like, oh, this is this person, which is amazing, or oh, this was my great-great-grandmother. And so I get to learn more about when they were installed, you know, what were they known for, you know, what was their duties as well. I think from the diaspora, I think it's just having that knowledge, because like I said, like you don't see a lot of archives from the 1800s, the early 1900s about, oh, this was this chief, oh, this was this individual, this queen mother, oh, these are the palanquins that they were riding on. And you might see videos of them, but it might be like very recent festival videos, not videos from like the 1940s. So it's amazing just to be able to interact with people who are actually connected, you know, within the families, that, oh, this is my grandfather or my great-grandfather. So
Yeah, I would say in terms of the diaspora, I definitely get lots of questions and comments for people who are interested in particular books by Ghanaian or African writers, particularly with a historical bent, I would say, because they're not that easy to access wherever they are. Or actually, it's not that they're not easy to access, but they don't know where to access them from. So if I'll post a book about Ghana history or African history, there's always definitely some kind of engagement from people in the diaspora. Whereas people from Ghana, I think actually they're probably in a literature, from a literature point of view, they're probably more interested in fiction and contemporary fiction as opposed to historical non-fiction and things like that. But I think the engagement is pretty high from both sides of you know, the diaspora and Ghana itself. So yeah.
I was muted. Okay. So I'm gonna ask a few questions that we have from our Q&A. Rita, for you, someone is asking if you could elaborate more on what you learned about the royal umbrellas.
Yes. So one thing I learned about the royal umbrella is that not every person will be under the same umbrella. So the kings have their specific umbrellas, and it's also depending on like embroidering that is about, you know, what they're known for, the Dinka symbols that they use, and even like the final, which is on top of the umbrella. So usually you have like on the linguistic staffs, they usually have like a proverb or a passage that explains like a story, like a folktale story, but you'll also see those also on the final, which is just like the top of the umbrellas. So that usually has a connection to the king. And as well, thinking about like the footsteps, if they're either dancing or they're just walking, the movement of the umbrellas, of the umbrella holder also mimics the movement of the individuals that's under it as well. And I think one of the weird kind of facts that I found out is that the king has like 23 umbrellas or around 20 umbrellas just ready because you just never know what's going to happen. And another like small like folks tell story that I learned was that the umbrella is also used not just to shade the individual, but it's also to kind of hide the thoughts from God. So whatever the king or the chief is learning or thinking, God does not have the access to know what he's thinking or his thoughts. I'm not sure how true that is, but that's one fact that I learned through my research. Yes.
Excellent, thank you. And Kuukuwa, we have a question for you. It says, I'm really interested in African architecture, especially the work of Francis Carey, who is working to modernize, he put in quotes, modernize our traditional architecture, instead of importing Western architecture, which isn't necessarily suited for our countries. Do you think it's possible for us to bring together a group of architects with shared passion for traditional African architecture and use that passion to build more schools, community centers with buildings that preserve our African architecture?
Thanks for the question. I'm also a fan of Francis Carey. Though I don't think he's trying to modernize per se, but he's sort of translating the ethos of his traditional architecture using modern contemporary materials and techniques, but also and techniques in using traditional histories and knowledges. But yeah, I think it's totally possible, and there's various groups of architects based in the diaspora and on the continent who are trying to do some of this same work. In Ghana, there's the architects, like I don't want to do a whole list, but there's different groups. So what we can do is we can connect after this, and I can connect you because I'm sure they will love a passionate person to join these projects.
Excellent. So we'll if you have questions, keep submitting them to the Q&A box. Like I said, we will have a full question and answer session after we finish this panel discussion. That'll be coming up in about maybe 5-10 minutes or so. So keep the questions coming. So and some of the things that were previously mentioned, people are saying about how people are, you all run platforms, but people share information with you, or they're asking questions on like Facebook or Instagram. So there seems like there is already like a sense of like collective knowledge that exists, which is great. But I think one issue that can arise as we're trying to learn about our history is that there sometimes can be a disconnect between different generations. So maybe the younger generation might know something that the older generation doesn't know, or the olders don't know something that the younger generation doesn't know. So how do you think we can use digital technology to bridge the gap that can sometimes exist between different generations? Anybody?
I don't have a problem with the different stories. Like I love it. I find it fascinating and exciting that people remember things differently. And I'm interested in why they remember things differently, why certain generations or cultures or subgroups remember one aspect that other groups don't remember. So my approach to the archive and the collection of histories is the more the better. I'm not trying to do one account of the founding of Ghana. I'm like, give me all the accounts, give me how everyone remembers it. I want to hear from the little boy. I think this I got from the Nana Project YouTube. Someone who was a child when they saw the motorcade passing. Like, I like this kind of granular detail. I don't just want the official account and they went there and this person came and this person came. So I want all of it, and I strive to bring everything together.
Yeah, I agree with Kuukuwa. It's the varied opinions makes our history whole, if that makes sense. That's what I would say. I see kind of archiving the viewpoints of history like really unique, is that you get the different perspectives, whether it's one person, even for example, even with Highlife, you could say I'm now learning there are different viewpoints of Boga Highlife and what it, where it's actually come from. And so I think it's important to have those varied perspectives. But I think your question was around how we can do it digitally, or if correct.
Yeah, how we can use like digital technology to connect different generations. Or
I think platforms like Instagram are great, but then also having platforms and discussions. So like the Zoom event helps that, because then you can kind of you can hear it from those that are the experts, or those that have been there, hopefully they're still alive, or even the younger generation. You can get those, like, it's more interactive, it's more engaging. So yeah.
Sylvia, do you have anything to add?
I would say, one of the things that we are trying to do, that we're often asked about by people in the diaspora, is to digitize some of the content that we have that is rare and out of print. And those books tend to come from the early 20th century, for example. And I think, by being able to digitize that, it will be a great help in terms of connecting people and connecting stories, actually, stories and writers from earlier generations to this particular generation. Because I guess, like, we have people at the library who are older members, and it's really interesting to see the kind of different things that older members and younger members read. And yeah, I think as far as using the digitization is concerned, I'm not quite sure how to answer that, actually. It's the short answer. But definitely in terms of digitizing older content that's no longer available in print, but making it available online, I think, that's a good way to go.
Excellent. And as I'm sure everyone knows right now, there's a lot going on in our world, especially for people of African descent. There's a lot of protests, a lot of vigils, a lot of memorials. There's a lot of people rising up, in my opinion, and I think that's good. And I've been seeing a lot of different images of protests in years past, and people making connections with the past to what's going on now. how do you all feel that us as, curators of, and founders of different Ghanaian, history platforms, what can we do to kind of support this global movement for Black lives and Black life that's happening now? Anyone?
Okay, I'll there we go. Go ahead, Rita.
Okay, so I think just through photos, through videos, is a source being able to acknowledge, because yes, we might not be there physically, but through social media, we're able to see it, and we're able to stand with, our sisters and our brothers and everyone that is fighting, just for their lives, just in general. And a lot of times, especially with archives, these like history just repeated itself. And before, especially with the documentations that was happening of these movements, a lot of times the documentations were lost, the photographers were lost, the credibility of who took those photos, why was those photos meant to be placed, or what was the meaning of them, are lost. So being able to have social media and be able to say, like, this is what happened, these are the photographers, these are the people that was on the front lines. It's just a great source just to say, this is what happened. So then in the next generation, they will have, who were these photographers? They might not be, the most famous photographers documenting these events, but at least we'll know their names and we'll know this is what they were doing. Because it's not easy photographing, photographing at these riots, or photographing within a mid of a crisis. Because it's literally, because like in a way they're putting their life at risk as well, and their gear at risk as well. So kind of just acknowledging that they're also going to set a new brand of archives that's going to be used within our kids' generation, or later generations and later generations.
Kuukuwa?
Oh, I thought Sylvia was going to speak.
Or Sylvia, would you like?
Okay, nice fast. Okay, I would say, like for me personally, with documenting the history of African literature and African and diaspora literature, it's a fantastic way to engender a pride in our people, and our people being, I'm talking about Africans and the whole African diaspora when I say our people, because I feel like it's important for us to know that we come from a long history of intelligent, literate people. And one of the things that you're not taught, but obviously the culture tells you when you're based in the West, when you're based in the UK or America or whatever, that the reason why your writers are not on the curriculum is because they didn't write anything worthy of reading, or that they only started writing in 1958 and 2004. And I think it's so important to be able to give, especially young people, but people who are awakening to themselves as African people in a way that maybe they hadn't identified or reckoned with before. I think it's important to be able to show them that this is the lineage that you come from, and it's something to be proud of. And our history extends what we've been told it extends beyond. We didn't just become people when colonialism ended. And I think the archive and the digital history platforms give people an insight into whether it's literature, whether it's photography, whether it's architecture or music. It says we've been here all along and we're still here, and we have there's a term, I think it's generational resilience or ancestral resilience. And so I think the archives are really important for empowering people.
That is so true. I just want to echo what Sylvia said in terms of, just in terms of education, it's such a powerful educational tool. And that's something that's quite important to me with an Ode to Highlife, especially with the younger generation. Yes, we have Afrobeats, but you need to understand the Afrobeats today, or the fella Afrobeat, came from Highlife. He was inspired by Highlife. He was in Ghana, in that time in the 1960s. And his music today, and music that we have today with Afrobeats, Afrofusion, Afro swing, is a direct influence of that. And musically, my gosh, Africans, West Africans, talented. When you hear the brass bands, when you hear the palm wine, you know, the musical intricacies, sorry. It shows our excellence that was beyond, it was like for a long time, basically. So from, in terms of supporting the Black Lives Matter, definitely from an educational point of view, just echoing what everybody else has said, yeah.
Yeah, and linking to those two as well is what a series I did when those were going on were in response to certain sentiments I saw coming from Ghana. When people were trying to protest, someone was arrested for holding a vigil in Ghana, for instance, and people were like, "Oh, but it's not your business. Like, protest about something in Ghana." One thing I tried to do was to show that this idea of Ghana, again, coming back to this over dependence or over focus on this big six and just these six men. It's like, what was behind them? What carried them? What supported them? So I did a series on African Americans who came, worked and lived, left their jobs, they left their lives abroad and came here to support the independence struggle, to support the new nation with their expertise and know-how. There's an African-American architect, Max Bond, built the Bogatanga Library. We have so many examples of people from all over Africa and in the diaspora who worked on this project that we call Ghana. And we can't say like it's not our business. It is all our business and it has always been all of our business.
Mercy, I'm muted. I'm sorry. It's also my first time. We're all learning together. But thank you for that. I think, like you all said, it's very important for us to be showing unity. I think especially Ghana does have a very, I would say, special position in the history of and hearts of the continent and people in the African diaspora. So I would say, I think it's especially important that us as people who are curating things related to Ghana history, to make sure that we're sharing things that show that our struggles are, struggles of Black people globally are interconnected. But I see the questions are coming in, so we're going to open it up to Q&A for all the attendees. You can ask questions in the Q&A box, and you can also, if you would like to actually speak to the panelists, you can raise your hand and we will unmute you. So I'll start with, here we go. So one question, this is to everyone. How do you make your digital archives accessible to elders who may not be as tech savvy?
Do you want us to answer now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, I thought you were going to take a group of questions and then you would answer. Okay. No, so what I was planning to do before COVID in July and August was to actually have a physical exhibition. So where we're doing, so I didn't mention, but my project, Accra Archive, we're actually digitizing an archiving process. So there's these old documents that we are scanning and photographing. So we had planned a physical exhibition in Accra, in Jamestown, that people could see. And I know like they're opening things up now, but I don't know. I don't feel confident that it's safe yet. So I'm going to put a pin in it for now. But that's a plan to actually have physical exhibitions in Accra.
Anyone else?
Similar to me as well. I was supposed to go on like a 6 months research back to Ghana in July, well, in this month. So I'm still crossing my fingers, and hopefully I was going to later on travel to different regions and talk with the elders and digitize some of the archives that are not accessible but might be accessible to them, so that it can still continue to grow, but also acknowledge that we are also telling their stories, not just from our own age generation's perspective of what they did, but also like the true stories of their perspectives from the 1930s or the 1920s. And also to end my trip was to have an exhibition but mostly once I get like the real concrete information about the individuals. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, because I think it's so easy to overlook older people when we're talking about technology and accessibility. We actually have a community project in Nsutem, which is in the Eastern region, and it's called Community of Literacy, and we're basically working with the community members from the top down to the bottom up, with the chief and the local radio station, a local church and a local school, to collect the stories of the people from that village. And I think it was about a year ago, we actually went there and recorded an interview with some of the elders in the community, and it was a video interview. And it was interesting because we had on one side of the camera young people from the community, and they were about, I think they were ranging in age from about 16 to 24. And you know, when we started speaking to the elders, in the beginning they were talking to the camera and they were talking to us, but then they quickly switched to talking directly to the young people who were behind the camera and saying, you know, like, when we were younger, we didn't have this, and you know, it was just such a positive, powerful experience to be able to do that. And in that sense, obviously technology really, really helps. And I think as much as we can take what we do offline and out to communities and to rural communities in particular, and show the stuff that we do to older people who don't have access or an understanding of technology, I think the better.
Yeah, I think similar to everybody else, similar to Kuukuwa and Rita, definitely planning on doing an exhibition, working with a few people locally in Ghana and here to do like a physical exhibition, in a physical space. But I'm open to ideas. So if anybody is interested in like hollering at me with any ideas on how we can, like,
Paulina, I'm hollering at you. You can do the exhibition.
Yeah, I'm open. So
yeah, let's talk.
Okay, cool. and hopefully I'm planning to be in Ghana next year, because with Highlife, most of the legends that are living, that's where they're based, and then hopefully try and move to Nigeria or Sierra Leone when it's safe to kind of just engage with them and let them know that we're here, we love you guys, and just note down their history by Black people, for Africans, by Africans, rather than it being Europeans, you know, either doing documentaries or writing about life. So yeah.
Paulina, there's actually a question here. There's two questions here. One actually asked, someone asked if you would, or if you've considered making a documentary on Ghanaian high life, especially as the older generation of high life musicians are, you know, are getting older. And someone else also asked if, how do you think the consumption and enjoyment of high life music has changed since the early days of palm wine high life?
That's a very good question. I'm gonna ask you to repeat the second one, so I'm gonna try and answer the first one.
Okay.
The first one, that is something that I'm currently working on with a few people who are, some who are based in London who are in the high life scene, and some locally. So that's something that's happening in its early stages. And yeah, so basically watch out for this space. But if you wanna, you know, give us more knowledge, or if you have some sort of expertise, to be honest, A Note to High Life is based on collaboration. So if you are a creative, a curator, an expert, a musician, holler at me. I'm open. So yeah. Repeat the second question for me, please.
How do you think the consumption and enjoyment of high life has changed since the early days of palm wine high life?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. I think sorry, that was a big sigh, because it's really rare. So a lot of people were surprised, and are surprised that I'm young and I'm a female behind A Note to High Life. Most people think it's like an older gentleman. And, you know, there are a few of us that really love it, you know, that really love Highlife and the kind of the like consuming the music. But I would say historically it's changed. You can see in terms of its timeline from, like, let's say the 1900s, 1950s, 1960s, and then when technology was introduced with the boy Highlife between 1980s to the 90s, and then the new millennium, it changed. So with the traditional brass bands, palm wines, folklore, indigenous Highlife, because Highlife is like an umbrella. There are so many strands under it. That they were based on concept parties, they were based live performance, live enjoyment. And then technology came, the discotheque with the Bugger Highlife scene. And then it just became, you could say, cheaper, easier to consume. But then we got exposed to Western side. And then, which is, I'm not saying it's bad or it's good, but with hip life, we started to sound more American. We started to lose bits of our Africanness, I would say, or our indigenous music. It's still there. Some artists, you know, do it really well, but we started to look like the West a bit. So I would say over time it changed. But then we do have new age bands, you know, like Santrafi, the Kwashibu area band, Teshuku, all of these new age current bands that are, you know, doing well, I would say. And then you also have, you know, the Highlife ones like they've skipped my mind. But so it's yeah, the consumption has decreased, but I'm hoping that with, you know, platforms like Untitled Highlife, that would come back, because people do want it. People do want, they're kind of going back into their Africanness. They're becoming awoken, they're becoming woke, and they're like, okay, I want to understand this music. However, sorry, just to add, world music fans, Europeans, they absolutely love Highlife. So from that point of view, consumption it's actually gone higher for them. Where locally, and some people may agree, in Ghana, they don't really patronize Highlife that much. So it kind of depends, yeah.
And just a reminder for the attendees, you can speak to the panelists directly. It's okay to ask questions in the Q&A, but if you would actually like to vocalize your question, you can do that. Just use the raise hands, click the raise hand button, and we'll take you off mute. So Sylvia, there's a question for you. Have you come across any history books, and do you remember any events they cover? And what kind of novels have you found? So I guess there's two questions there.
Okay, sorry, I missed the first part. Have I come across any history books? And
do you remember any events they cover? That's the first question, yeah.
In Ghanaian history books?
Sure. The question just said history books, so it could be Ghanaian history or history of other African countries.
Well, actually, you know, we just received a big donation from somebody very kind in Germany who'd read about us online. And she donated 4,000 Ghana cedis worth of books from a publisher called Sub-Saharan Publishers. And I don't know if anybody knows them, but Sub-Saharan Publishers are based in Accra in Ghana here. And it was founded by a woman called Akos Ofori-Mensah in 1992. And they specialize in books on Ghanaian history as well as other books. But for example, part of the donations was a massive book called The History of the Ewe People. Another one was essays about the Ga people. There is also a history of indigenous slavery by Kosia Purby. What else? There's a history of Elmina, for example, which is really interesting. It's about Elmina and how the city has changed based on its encounter with Europeans, etc. And so there are loads and loads. And, you know, I think especially if you can look to Ghanaian publishers such as Sub-Saharan and support them, it's good for our publishing industry here as well. So check them out.
And so someone actually has another question for you about donating. They want to know if it's possible to donate some of the African and Afrocentric books to youth and children and across the African continent. Is that something that your library has done in the past or is open to doing?
Yes. Yeah, we, in 2018, December 2018, we ran a campaign called Book Drop Ghana. And part of that campaign was that obviously lots of diasporans come to Ghana at Christmas, and they come to party and they come to have fun and, you know, whatever else. But we realized that there are lots of Ghanaians who come who actually want to help, but they're probably tired of being asked for money. And so we thought it would be good to ask them to bring a book with them. And we had different donation points across Accra. There was one at Accra Mall, at Achimota Mall, West Hills Mall, and one at the library. And we asked them to drop off the books that they brought and put them into these donation bins. And we then had like an open application process where we asked people to nominate schools and communities that they thought needed these books. So that was in 2018. We haven't run it again, but we will probably run it again this year, depending on the whole COVID situation. But if anybody is interested in donating books, yeah, please contact me and we can discuss. I mean, one of the issues I would say with the Book Drop Ghana was that a lot of people donated adult books, but when it came to the application process, most people were asking for children's books because they were applying from schools. So we had a disproportionate amount of, you know, adult books and not so many children's books. So I would say if you're interested in donating, please be conscious of what you donate, and the reading level is important as well, because unfortunately we do have an issue with illiteracy here, or low literacy in particular. So you may think you're buying that, you know, it says it's for an 8 to 9-year-old in the UK or in America, but when you bring it to Ghana, you know, a 14-year-old sometimes would struggle to read that book. So be mindful of that. And also as many culturally relevant books as possible, please. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so there's a question for everyone. Is there a website through which university students and other people in the UK can access fictional novels based in colonial and post-colonial Ghana, but particularly pre-colonial Ghana, by Ghanaian authors or those with Ghanaian heritage?
I didn't get the first part of the question, but I heard pre-colonial, so that made me think of the classic, which is Aikweama 2000 Seasons, which is very difficult to get hold of. It's a novel. It's out of print, but you can, if you're prepared to spend a bit of money on it and search for a while, that's a good book to get. Yeah, I would recommend that.
Anyone else? Yeah, the question was about if there's like a website or like somewhere online that university students can go to like find more fiction novels, especially those that are based in like pre-colonial or set in pre-colonial Ghana.
No, that I know.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know novels really, but the Basil Mission Archives is a good website to get a lot of archives from pre-colonial photos. So it's not a novel, but it's still a good database that universities can go through.
Okay, we have someone who wants to ask their question directly. Carl?
Hi, ladies. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hello.
Honestly, I'm so excited. It's absolutely amazing being able to listen to all of you speak and hear about your experiences. One thing I wanted to ask all of you is, what is the main obstacle that you find in trying to further your cause, and what would you need to overcome it? But I find it quite interesting because, you know, everything is, the work that you're doing, the mission that you're all on individually is serving a very, you know, specific set of purposes for yourselves. And it can be quite frustrating and disheartening when there are obstacles that come up. But I wanted to know what those one of those obstacles for each one of you, and what you would need to overcome it. If it's funding, whatever. I'm really interested.
I think for me, like I kind of have like two obstacles. So like one, like when you get these information or when you see the photos, a lot of times the caption is literally zero. They don't have the name of the individual, or they'll just be like, oh, the Ashanti chief, and that's it. Or they might not even have a time period. Or even, especially within Instagram, you gotta give credit, or, you know, copyright issues. So a lot of times it sucks that, you know, you had to pay over like $100 just to like purchase one photo, or even more just to have the copyright or have the accessibility to say, like, if you want to do an exhibition, you have to say, okay, I need this photo in like 8.5 by 11, but it's going to cost you like $145 just to get the photo printed or have you to have access to it. So I think when you're dealing with archives that are not owned, even though it's about your people, but it's not owned by your people, which is very sad. Like it costs money to just to get the information. So I think even if there was just a way that we had like accessible funds just to be able to provide for us. So even if it's getting books, if it's getting photos, videos, even artifacts as well, you know, it would just be able to help. So then it's not just something that's digital, but it's also something that people can, you know, face-to-face actually get in contact with these artifacts as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'm so curious.
I'm like, in my head, I'm trying to like think of the obstacle that I can say without getting into the least trouble. So, so I'll shelve that one. So I'm lucky that for my Accra archive project, the one that's digitizing the architectural archive, I'm lucky that I'm funded. So I applied for a grant from the British Library, and that's where I got the money to do it, which was a difficult process on its own, because at the time I was not even a PhD student. I was like just some girl saying, give me money, give me lots of money to go do this. So that part was difficult, but kind of overcome that. And the second one is someone like kind of interest. So I was when Kirstie invited me to this, and I saw all these other people on my Instagram. So I'm like, I didn't think there'll be so many people who have this specific interest in this historical old stuff and putting stuff right and actually building a library and stuff. So I was like so geeked out. Sometimes it feels kind of lonely that like, why are you so interested in this weird historical stuff? So it's nice to see a community and like to see how many that this event was sold out. So it's sometimes it feels like people aren't interested in the work that you're doing, especially if you're doing a certain kind of, not falling into certain tropes and things, and you're not doing what's trendy or whatever. So it's nice to see you. So thank you. You guys have helped me overcome another obstacle, that my fellow panelists and the people who sold out this great event, and the organizers, of course.
Yeah, that is so true. I definitely echo what Kuukuwa said in terms of sometimes it feeling lonely, and it's really encouraging to see, you know, platforms, historical platforms as well, and historical platforms that are giving you, that are, I'd say, consistent, because it's not easy, which kind of links on to my next point, is time. Time sometimes can be an obstacle. I want to make sure that I'm a perfectionist at times. I want to make sure I'm getting the right information out. But sometimes the downside of social media is that you've got to post every day. And I have to remember to take breaks, refresh, go back, and not kind of be driven by likes or followings. Even though they are very important for exposure, which is another obstacle. Specifically with Highlife, people see my page and like, oh yeah, Highlife, nice. I'm like, no, it's really important for us to for me, it's very essential, because I feel like we all, you know, there's this premise, there's this understanding that music comes from, you know, Black people, comes from Africa, and I'm like, okay, so where's the history to that? You know, how documented that? You know, it's like we have, and you know, there are great people like somebody that is quite notable and that's helped me is Professor John Collins. His books has helped me in the beginning a lot. And now I'm finding there are other West African or African writers who have been documenting it as well, especially looking at females in Highlife, which is an important subject. And so it's that missing piece of, it's people taking Highlife seriously, understanding that it's part of our history, it's what makes us who we are musically. It shows us how intelligent we are. So just, it tells us about our future. And the fact that, you know, if they didn't exist, we wouldn't have Afrobeats today. So we need to, you know, pay tribute to them. So including funding, that's also an
Yeah, I would just second everything that Kuukuwa and Paulina said. I don't think I could say it any better. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, ladies.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have someone else that is ready to ask a question. Francine?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. My Ghana internet is working really well today, so we are winning. So, it's been such a great session. I've got kind of two questions. I think they're kind of connected, so I'll ask them both at the same time. First of all, I wanted to ask, have any of you had experiences with Ghana's National Archives, and what was that like? And then secondly, do you think Ghanaian history should be archived by Ghanaians alone?
I'll go. So the National Archive, PRAD, is one of the sort of support stations for my funded projects, because my plan is to deposit a copy of all the digitized documents with them so that anyone can go there and get it. It's also going to be online with the British Library, which is like, that's part of, they gave us the money, so it's going to go there. And also, I'm also in talks with different organizations to have a website. I've secured like a year subscription for the website, but hoping to get more money so it can be available forever. So working with the National Archives, like one thing is like they have so much there that we don't know because they're not funded and they're not supported. They don't get the budget that they request. They have and there's a lot that they need to digitize that they would like support size. And also it's beyond Accra, like the Cape Coast Archive is amazing. There's also Kumasi and Tamale, just all these sources with things that have been abandoned kind of and left there and might deteriorate and get destroyed if we don't do something about it.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Has anyone else got any kind of experiences? I'm just saying that I've been to the archives, and at least in Accra, and it wasn't really the experience I expected. And that's probably my fault for maybe being a bit more optimistic. But just like, yeah, just kind of the kind of state and then just the length of time it maybe takes for them to like try and find anything because of the disorganization. So it kind of, it's just really difficult to see what it is they have in the first place. So I just wanted to know if it, like, that's great, Kuukuwa, that was great kind of having that insight. Has anyone else kind of delved in a bit more to understand what it is other than budget, which is always the kind of the case that they're missing in order to kind of make it more accessible and then maybe move into this kind of more digital space other than just money? No?
I really think it's mostly money. I really think the time working with them. Because people, like, there's civil servants who don't get paid for a year in Ghana. And I don't know about you, but if it was me and this was like my only job and like I was showing up and I haven't been paid for a year, I have school fees and stuff to pay, and you tell me, go find me this thing from 1900, like I will also probably walk very slowly as well. But yeah, it's a lot of this money just in my interactions and talking to people. So money as in people individually are not motivated and paid. The institution itself is not funded and hasn't been funded for years. But I should say that they also get funding from external bodies. So they also have a British Library grant to digitize one specific portion of the stuff that they have there. So there's people that try. I also used to have the same thing, Francine, but after I went there and I talked to people and I work then what was behind the things there. Like it's just harder to be annoyed because yeah, they're struggling.
Yeah, completely understand. So then on to my second question. Do you think Ghanaian history should be archived by Ghanaians only?
I mean,
Rita's like, yeah.
I mean, yes, no, but I would say traditionally or historically, it hasn't always been. So, I mean, we've had some like, you know, great people, great contributors who have helped archive our history, but it hasn't always been by Ghanaians or by Africans. And so, yes, now is the time now, and I guess that's why, you know, we're here. So yeah, I think that's what makes it authentic, you know, if it's from the actual source.
Yeah, and I also just go on with that because, like, especially with the chieftaincies and like different festivals and different events, you know, we get photographers from the Western countries like the UK, United States. They come to, you know, Kumasi to document these events. But then they take the photos, but they don't interview, okay, so who is this person? Why are we documenting this event? Or they might have like a really brief summary. So then later on, it's just like, okay, like who is this individual? Which, and even like the cloth, even like the kente cloth, like what was it? What was the importance of the kente that they're wearing? Because even like learning about like the cloth, like the Si.Hene doesn't wear the same kente as everyone else. So there's this, you know, there's an importance of why he was wearing that individual cloth, or even some of the other regalias, or even the throne or the stools. It's sad because it's just like, okay, they take these photos, but then they don't go more deeper about, okay, this is the individual, this is the importance, this was the year, this is what it was used for. So in a way, it's just like, okay, here's these photos, but that's it. So when it's actually documented or archived or even preserved by Ghanaians, we have a deeper understanding, okay, this is why they were wearing this cloth, or this is why this event is used. And even the writings of these events, because a lot of times they misspell a lot of the names, misspell a lot of the cities and regions. So you might say, okay, I know this is how you spell, but they didn't spell it right. So, because even though like their university database, and you will think if it's a university database or a museum database, it should have the right information, because it's providing that information for the viewers or the consumers or for the students, because we're writing these information within either it's like a PhD dissertation, your college thesis paper, or even like a high school, or just writing about an individual. You will want to be able to get that real information. So I just think, I mean, I guess we have some really good documentations that was written, but I just feel like for further on within generations, it will be good just to be able to have Ghanaian writers writing and archiving these photos, because out of anyone, we know how to tell our story, because, you know, our elders lived through it.
Cool. I think that makes complete sense for the context and the detail. So, and if anyone else has got anything to say, I think you guys have answered my question. So thank you.
Thanks, Francine. We're gonna ask a question from our list. There's a lot of, I see just everyone sees, I see your question. So if we haven't gotten to it, it's coming. So please just hold tight. There's a question about Kuukuwa for you. Where is the Accra archive? Someone wants to visit.
So the Accra office, we're doing the digitizing work, is not open to the public yet. We're working with really endangered files. Some of these things like would literally disintegrate if you touch them with your bare hands. So we work with like acid-free white gloves and things like that. It's not open for visits yet. We are planning exhibitions so people can come to the physical space and different physical spaces and see things. But the aim from the beginning with this Accra Archive project was to have this digital resource, open access online, that anyone could go. Because this is about 100,000 files. We're already around 50,000 individual photographs. So it will be difficult to have this in a physical space. And we are working with the Accra Metropolitan Assembly on a physical space. But again, with the more I find out about how these things work, the more I don't hold my breath for some of these government level institutional changes. But it's going to be digital, and we're going to have exhibitions soon, COVID permitting.
Excellent. And Paulina, there's a question for you. Would you consider Wulome music as Highlife?
Did I consider, sorry?
Maybe I might be mispronouncing it. W-U-L-O-M-E.
Wulome.
There we go.
Wulome, from my understanding, is part of the Ga tribe. So, the person can correct me if I'm wrong. And I would consider that as part of the umbrella of Highlife music, because Highlife, you know, it being based and being born in Ghana, comes out of the indigenous, you know, music from the different tribes. So I would consider that, yes, as part of Highlife, as an umbrella.
Excellent. Okay, we have someone else that wants to ask their question to you all directly. You can get him. Hi, Prince.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. Good evening.
Good evening.
I just wanted to contribute to the discussion on the archive. I've been a student, and all this while we've been discussing in class that in Ghana we see ourselves as keeping personal archives instead of sending the artifacts or the documents or historical information to the National Archive or something. So growing up, for instance, I had parents who kept a very big box in the house, and they used to keep these documents and artifacts in this box. And anytime you want anything, you go into this big box and then you can get that. So I've also participated in there was a project called Community History. And so we go to communities and record their history. So you could see that people keep their history more than sending these artifacts to the archives. So I think we can also look at that. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Does anyone have a response to that?
Yeah, I think it was just a contribution.
Oh, okay.
Not a contribution, but great.
Yes, thank you. Because I know personally, my parents, we have boxes upon boxes of pictures from when, like, my father's childhood, my mom when she was at college, from when both of my parents, they met in the United States, but, you know, there's pictures of both of them before they met. And then, of course, my sister and I growing up, our Ghanaian church that we went to in, you know, in the 1990s in Washington, D.C. So I think Prince makes an excellent point about that. Yes, we have these digital spaces that we have, then we have the physical spaces, the museums, but our homes can also serve as archives for our personal, you know, for our family history and personal histories as well. So thank you, Prince.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will go back to the question list. Let's see. Here's a question for everyone. What Ghanaian texts or thinkers have contributed the most to how you approach your archival practice?
I will definitely say Kwame Nkrumah. And one of the most important rare and out of print books that I actually purchased about 2 years ago was a signed Kwame Nkrumah Ghana, My Autobiography book. And I can't overemphasize really just how it made me feel to have this book that was signed by Nkrumah. And it also came with a letter that he had written as well, and a dedication. And I think this goes back to a point that somebody was making earlier about whether Ghanaians should be archiving Ghanaian history, or whether Ghanaians alone should be archiving Ghanaian history. And Kwame Nkrumah's archive was in the hands of his executrix, June Milne, who was a white British woman. And when she died a few years ago, it then fell into the hands of her son, or was bequeathed to her son. And he actually looked apparently like hard and long to try to find an African university or institution that would take Kwame Nkrumah's papers. And he apparently was unsuccessful in finding an African institution, a Ghanaian institution that would, that said they had the facilities to be able to take these documents. So he was going to give them to the British Council, sorry, to the British Library, I should say. He was going to give them to the British Library, but then a group of African writers and journalists and academics got together, and they obviously lobbied to have the archive in Africa, and it was taken by the Thabo Mbeki Foundation in South Africa. And apparently it's with them until Ghana decides that they have the facilities or will produce the facilities to look after these documents. So, you know, Kwame Nkrumah's archive was extensive. Every time I feel like I've bought the last Kwame Nkrumah book, there are another 10 that he wrote that are, you know, out there in the world, but not necessarily easy to get hold of in Ghana. And he's definitely been influential in my thinking about archiving and why it's so important.
I would cheat. I know you said Ghanaian and you said one person, but my whole ethos is like one person can't do anything alone. So I'm influenced by like groups of academics and people, not necessarily, they're not necessarily speaking to archiving in particular, that is, but on histories and the multiplicity of histories and stories. So I name people like Abna Dove Asari, people like Prof. Adumako Ampofo, like Sylvia Tamale, not Ghani, I'm cheating again. Also Christina Sharp. Just the approach to thinking of what the archive is and what the archive can be beyond the historical official record, and looking and knowing that a lot of official archives are not crafted to preserve ordinary people's stories or preserve them in history. So this has influenced how I think of building an archive or building archives or documenting things, and where I look and what I look beyond and what I seek to include. But yeah, the thing about Sylvia's point about like whether like which was in response to Francine, I think, question about whether I should be Ghanaian. I think my question is like I don't really, my hot take answer is I don't really care who documents it as long as they do it ethically and responsibly and make it open. Because like, a part of me feels like if other people who were in Ghanaian hadn't archived and documented, some have nothing and no basis. And this is because I'm a historian, I'm used to not seeing one source as the truth. Like I never take any source, like even if it is Kwame Nkrumah's autobiography, like it's about him, it's about himself, but it's like a document he's writing for a certain purpose. So I would always read accounts of him and other people's encounters of him anyway. So I approach it as multiplicity of source. And I would like to see, to Rita's point, like the person who just comes to snap it and doesn't bother to ask what the kente is. That I think is also interesting in its own. Why was their positionality? Why didn't they ask? And the person who snaps and asks as well, to bring that together to kind of tell a fuller picture of that day and the kente that was born. Yeah.
I'm gonna cheat a little bit too. So the person that really I get a lot of the works from and information too is from Doran H. Ross, who was an American photographer and also historian. And he's actually known for a lot of the publications of a lot of the Chieftaincy and Royal Regalia books, and as well within their collection at, I believe, I think it's UCLA archives. So they have like a really big foundation of archives and documentations of the Royal Regalia and the chieftaincy that was documented within the 1950s through the 1970s. And he's also like been a really good help within finding different art exhibitions that have been placed within the United States. So like, I was even able to go to the Glasso collection at the the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, Texas, which was amazing. Even though some of the information, I wish there was more about it, about each of the artifacts or the documentations or the individuals, but it gave a structure to be able to see, you know, a lot of these artifacts and photos, not just online, but also in a physical museum aspect.
I would say for me, it would definitely be Professor John Collins, even though he's now naturalized, so he's naturalized as a Ghanaian. But honestly, he was the first person when I was doing research that came up a lot. I think he's written quite a lot, but from the books that I've understood, that I've seen, it's written of 5 or 6 that I've seen in terms of Highlife historically. So he's been really beneficial in terms of how I present my content, looking at melting points and the timeline, which is important for me to start off with the timeline before I start going on to anything specific. So yeah, it's just, yeah. And I've mentioned him before, so yeah.
What? We have another question about burnout. So if you are running your archives on your own, how do you ensure you don't burn out, and what can we do to support your work? It's a very important question.
I think when I started my fall semester of my second year, last year in a way. So within writing papers about the Royal Umbrellas, I started, you know, building like a Google Drive of folders of documents. So eventually over time, I'll be able to keep constantly posting. But we talked about, you know, families and family archives. And I think especially within my transition of how the interactions have built up within Si.Hene, I've been seeing a lot of the family interactions of, oh, this is my grandfather, this is my great grandfather, or even this is my mom or my grandma. So even being able to have sources where, you know, sons, grandsons, great granddaughters are able to also help to build upon their legacy of their parents, their grandparents, will also be beneficial to Si.Hene and actually just to Ghana as well. Because even with an archive, one person cannot do everything or cover everything within information, but as together within, even if we're discussing different like music or architecture or even the library structure, but being able just to continue as a community within families to also input information that might not be provided as well.
I'll just be honest and say I don't avoid burnouts. Like just recently, as last month, I had an episode where I just had to like stop everything because my body just won't let me continue. And with Accra Archive, I work with 2 people in my team, 2 amazing people in my team, Lois and Elton. But I have like other projects that I run in addition to my current PhD research. So it does get a lot sometimes. I would like to work with people. And before I used to a lot, but it's hard to find people that are like actually interested enough and committed. So if I find people like these 2 people I work with now, it's organic and natural, and then it's amazing the way you work with them. So it's a slow process because, again, we're a small community of people that are like interested in these tiny little histories. So if someone is watching and you're interested in this stuff, holla at me. I'm always looking for people to work to because that's a lot of work.
I just want to interject before we get off the call. I will give the panelists a chance to say how you can contact them and where you can find them online, because there's actually a few questions about people wanting to get involved with some of the work that people are doing. So they'll share all of that information before we go, so you don't have to worry. So it's good that people are interested in contributing. But Paulina or Sylvia.
So how I deal with burnout, it's hard. Similar to Kuukuwa. I think I mentioned this earlier. Sometimes it's about taking a break, but then you're trying to find the balance of trying to put out as much content as possible. And I guess overcoming that is, like everybody has said, is finding the right people to join the team. I've mentioned this before, I'll say it again, A Note to Highlife is based on collaborative effort. We want anybody who's interested in Highlife, who's interested in content creation, to kind of join the team, because it's not just about the digital platform, there's more that we want to do as well. But in terms of overcoming burnout, I guess that's the hustle life when you're trying to balance, you know, other full-time, you know, requirements, full-time job or anything else. So yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure if Sylvia had anything to add. Sylvia?
Yeah, I mean, it's very tough. I'm burnt out right now, actually, I should say, because we've just opened the new library. We've moved from one location to the next. And yeah, it's difficult. One thing I would say is that since there's been quite a bit of publicity around this new library, I had lots of people volunteer. And I have now 2 volunteers, and one of them started today. And so that's been fantastic. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. I think trying to get people, everybody has said, who are just passionate about the work as you are, which maybe you'll never be able to find somebody as passionate about the work as you are, because it's your work and your baby, but at least who are, you know, reliable and committed and trustworthy. That's half the battle. So yeah, that's it maybe.
A question for Kuukuwa and Rita. Do you think the weather conditions and electricity rationing affect archives and the race to get everything digitized? Actually, I think that could be open to everybody. But yeah.
No.
What's the last part of that?
Is it, do you think the weather conditions and electricity rationing affects the archives and the race to get everything digitized?
I think so, because sometimes when we think about how do we digitalize them, is usually having like a very secure scanner or whatever possible way you can photograph it. And sometimes even the best lighting might not be the best lighting for that archive or for that photo. So one thing I've been like noticing, trying to figure out like for the next step is like, if I'm going to these regions and I'm going to these families, you know, we have lights out. So what is the best way within time, if there is sun or there's no outlet or there might not be electricity, what is the best way to archive these documents? So one thing I thought about is like a portable scanner, where you can just kind of put the image through like a little slider scanner, and we're able to, without any wires or any cords, you can able to scan the image. And it's very portable. I think you might just have to have batteries or just something like a charging cord beforehand. And then also, I just feel like I said within my stories, like these cameras that we have, these phones that we have, the camera possibilities are amazing now. So even being able to use your phone and being able to use the right time of the day to actually archive these photos are great. But then when it comes to like showcasing archives, one thing I kind of noticed within some of the museums in Ghana is that over time, the archives can also, or the photos can start getting molds or molding because they might not be framed well or using the right mat board. So we also had to think about within the type of temperature in that room or the type of mat board or frame that we're using, how can we make these photos last longer? So even in the archive department, what containers are you using that are like acid free, that are not going to have brown or green edges around the photos or the documents? Or what type of slides or negative slides can you use that might not scratch a film camera slide? So like little different equipment that might not use electricity could also be beneficial when it comes to archiving, because you can never know, like the little scratch could damage a paper. You know, the wrong temperature or, you know, the coldness or the hotness in a room could also damage a photo. So what type of, you know, structure can we build together within making sure that these archives can be last longing?
Yeah, short answer, yes. The weather and the electricity absolutely affects the process of digitization and even the material to be digitized. So with the documents that I'm currently digitizing in my project, where they were stored was near the sea, and there were sorts of leaks and stuff in places. There was mold, there were like rats and cockroaches. So there were some of the documents there were as old as before 1900. So some of them are just so fragile. You touch them and they disintegrate. And I'm choosing to start with this Accra project was because of just how endangered those material were. I'd also seen architectural material in Kumasi and in Tamale and in Cape Coast, which were also in poor shape, but at least were not disappearing and disintegrating right out of my eyes. And then the electricity as well affects it. And this is linked to Prague because they have to have some places which are cold rooms for some of the material and the artifacts they have. But if the lights keep going off and they're not funded to get generators, then there's periods for long periods where these things are not in optimum environmental conditions. So these are just a few of the challenges people that are trying to preserve in museums and in archives in Ghana. And if anyone here has Ghana Museum, you will know what's happening there. But yeah, it's just what we do, and we can talk about this later, Rita. But like I have some suggested scanners on the go. Yeah.
We have an interesting question about Pan-Africanism that I think would be good to answer. With Ghana being a pioneer of Pan-Africanism after the wave of independence in the former colonies, is any of your endeavors attempting to get that sub-movement revived, especially from a grassroots perspective? So are any of you interested in bringing Pan-Africanism, or not to say bringing it back, but yeah, because the question is asking about reviving Pan-Africanism from the grassroots level through your platforms. Any takers?
I didn't want to talk again. I mean, personally, personal politics, like I just believe like the lines are clear and there's the people who have to come together by necessity, not even just if we like each other. So yeah, this Pan-Africanist politics is like really important to me. And Pan-African is continental, but also diaspora, which again, like Ghana is the pioneer in terms of the African movement of things, but Nkrumah gets his ideas from the Caribbean and from the African American nationalist already. So it's a global thing, it's a global movement. When I find relevant material, I do disseminate it, and that's in the course of my work. I do disseminate, but like, yeah, I totally believe and agree that we're all in this struggle together and we must work together.
Anyone else? Okay. So for the attendees, we will be wrapping up in about 10 minutes. So if you have any more questions, please send them in now. If you want to ask your question verbally, you can do so. But since we are getting to the end, it does need to be very brief. There's one more question here for Paulina. Someone is asking if you've had the chance to work with any living Highlife artists.
So it's something that I'm definitely working on. So earlier this year, when I was fortunate enough to be in Ghana, I got an opportunity to talk to George Darko and just hear like his story and record that with his permission, and that was quite insightful. So I'm hopefully, when I go to Ghana soon, that's something that is currently being worked on through like people who are helping me on the ground with a no life. Yeah, so.
Great. So I actually have one question. I guess it can be, if no one else has any other questions, it can be the final question. So 200 years from now, in 2200, let's say, someone is looking at our digital platforms and all the other platforms, there's Gold Coast of Ghana, there's Ghana Museum, and Ewa History. There's a lot of other digital platforms that exist. And if they're looking at all of these things, what do you think they'd be able to understand about Ghana based on what they see about us archiving today?
I think my first answer to that would be that it's a very rich history. Like, our history is very, very rich, and it shows the diversity in our history and in our culture. That would be my first response. I'll probably add afterwards.
I think really like within the chieftaincy, like royalty is embedded within our identities. Because even though like we always say like, our ancestors were kings and queens, but now you're able to actually see these are the Pacific, kings and queens that, are ruling or was ruling during that time. And these were the things that they were wearing, like even kente cloth. We're all wearing kente cloth within the diaspora and also in the country and on the continent. So being able to see like, this is why this kente cloth was important, or even the sandals, this is why they were wearing the sandals. These are the different Adinkra symbols that were so popular within these individuals. Even a lot of times we, get tattoos of Adinkra symbols that mean something meaningful to us or to our families. So all our traditions and our cultures will always be embedded within us. We might not totally understand to the fullest extent, the background of it, but we always know it's going to be embedded into our backgrounds and within our children's and furthermore as well.
I would think and I would hope that they would see just a multiplicity of stories and sources about Ghana and living in Ghana, to be able to understand where different people come from, where they go, where they're going, and reasons behind things. As a student of history, I'm often fascinated to just come across like a recorded story. Someone probably just carelessly wrote something down, didn't think much of it at the time. But then it's like you're in the archive and you're like, oh my God, this is why this thing that I'm seeing today is happening. And I'm hoping in 200 years, like it's not as difficult as it is for us to access our stories and our histories. And like, I hope everything is everywhere to the extent that people are even bored of Ghanaian history, because there's just so much of it.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And I would say that people would see that we lived, we thrived, we struggled, we endured, we persevered, and we survived. I think that's what the archive will tell.
So we have one, so this question that I'm asking will be the final question. And if you want, like I said, after this question, I'll give the panelists time to say where you can find them. So if you have more questions, if you were feeling shy today and you weren't able to ask your question, they can give you information for you to contact them. So this question is about repatriation of archives and artifacts. So does digitization help or hinder the argument for repatriation of archives and artifacts? Is it better to have the exposure of our culture overseas, or would it be better for them to be appreciated back home in their historical and cultural context, allowing for interested parties to access them online or even going to Ghana, which could potentially help tourism?
I would say it helps, and it's also like in this transition period for them to give us back our stuff, having digitally while we wait, because it's not just about returning the artifacts, but it's also where the artifacts are going to go, whether they can be cared for and preserved. Yeah, we don't want them to come just to get destroyed within a year. So digitizing and having these records It's just sort of like a measure in the transition period. Well, that's how I see it. As we get a more just world where anyone can access these things, where the borders don't exist and things like that. In the meantime, here's this thing online that people can access.
But yeah, just to back up that, you know, so even through this pandemic where you're not visually being able to, well, you're not physically being able to go to these museums or go to these exhibitions or go to these buildings or departments, you know, it gives you a digital library of these archives. It might not be able to give you the full explanation or summary, but like those little moments definitely do help. So then when things do start to open up, and then things can actually come into plan about, okay, how do we build a place, or how do we have different buildings that are already accessible to the people, make them a little bit better or advance the technology so that we can continue to preserve these artifacts in these archives, but also give them a structure so if they do come back, we'll be able to, you know, present them well and be able to store them for many years.
I agree with both of them. I can see you looking like
just, you know, giving space, you know, if you or Sylvia have anything else to add, it's also cool if you don't.
No, I don't. I mean, they said it all. They said it all.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, well, with that then, how can people contact you? What are, you know, your digital archive handles? What's your, someone asked about your LinkedIn's, if, you know, people want to connect with you, you know, professionally. So yes, how can people find you?
Am I going first again?
Okay.
Yeah, so I think I see my full name on the bottom of the thing. I don't know if other people see it, but yeah, if you search this name, I'm like one of 2 people who has this name. I checked in the world. Kuukuwa Manful. The other is a lawyer, so, and she doesn't have a big social media profile presence, so it will be me. So yeah, just Kuukuwa. So I'm on Twitter at my first name _ and on Instagram at the same, but follow my archive project and stuff, because my personal Instagram is boring. There's nothing there. So yeah, Kuukuwa Manful, and Twitter is probably the best, and then we can get to talking from there.
Okay, for me, so just to, for Si.Hene, just SI.HENE. My personal Instagram is Rita Mawina, which is my middle name, so MAWUENA. And also within LinkedIn, Twitter is still Rita Mawina Benissan, well, LinkedIn, and then Twitter is just Rita Mawina as well.
So for me, on LinkedIn, that's more of a professional HR page, but you can definitely hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram as Paulina Nkansah, so as Kuukuwa said, my name, but it comes up as I'm a Picasso as well, because I'm an artist. On Twitter, Paulina Nkansah as well. For an Ode to Highlife, that is the same name, an Ode to Highlife on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, but you can also email us at anotohighlife@gmail.com. And we're also on Facebook as well. Did I say that? I think I did.
And for the library, we are on Instagram, which is our main social media platform, and that's LOATAD, LOATAD.org. We're also on Facebook at LOATAD, LOATAD. .org, as opposed to _, which is on Twitter, and also on Facebook as well. Sorry, not Facebook, Twitter. We're also at LOATAD, I think LOATAD.org. And yeah, that's it. As for LinkedIn, I mean, I'm hardly ever on it, but you could search my name and I'll be on there. So thank you very much.
Excellent. And I guess I can give my information as well. My name, if you on LinkedIn and Twitter. The name that you see on my screen is how you can find me. The Nana Project, if you're interested in connecting with us on Facebook and on Twitter, we are the Nana Project. On Instagram, it is _Nana_project. And Project 1957, I believe, is at Project 1957 on all of their platforms. And I think we will be posting the panelists' connection information as well after this. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben from Project 1957 to finish up, but thank you all for attending.
Lovely. I just want to say a very, very, very big thank you to the panelists, our amazing panelists, and also our awesome host, Kirstie. I hope everyone that is here enjoyed themselves, but also took something away from today's discussion. You can keep the discussion going. As Kirstie said, for people who maybe didn't get a chance to ask a question, you can keep the discussion going on social media. You can follow us on all platforms at Project 1957 or the Nana Project at the Nana Project. And yeah, just let us know what you think. If you don't have any questions, just let us know what you thought of the webinar. We obviously trying to make the most of the situation at hand, which is the fact that we're in lockdown. So hopefully this was something that was of great use to everyone who is here. But yes, follow us on socials. We will put the panelists' social media details on our pages as well, so you can follow up with them. But yeah, I think that's basically it. Yeah, so thank you very much. Have a good evening, enjoy yourselves, stay safe, have a great week, and stay blessed.
And thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.